Welcome to the Tearing It Up podcast. I'm your host, Taryn. We'll be tearing it up, tearing it down, and tearing it apart, dissecting all things related to those who deviate from the standard. From leaders of their industry to leaders of mediocrity, and maybe a gear review or two thrown in. We shoot the shit and let the conversations flow, so if that's not your style, this may not be for you. Otherwise, listen in. Hope to light a fire in you somehow. Hello, everybody out there. We are back with another great guest. August has just been on fire. September is going to be as well, because actually now we're in September. We're the last couple days of August actually recording this, but you will be hearing it in September. So by the time it's hitting your ears, it's been a great month and a half of incredible guests, incredible women business owners who are just gritty, tenacious, and doing the damn thing. And I'm really excited to dive in today with Mallory of Ewer. She has some amazing things to say that I think our audience will really resonate with, and things you can just, again, we're kind of on this theme of shopping smartly. Like, we're heavy in the outdoor industry for sure, but not all our listeners are, but it still goes across all industries of how you can just be a better consumer. I know that's one of Amber's things for sure, is being a very mindful consumer of things. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear what Mallory has to say and learn a thing or two to keep in the back of your mind or the front of your mind the next time you go into any kind of store. So Mallory, will you tell us where you're at physically in the world right now as we speak?
Sure thing. I am sitting in my home office in Lolo, Montana. I am based out of Missoula, Montana, but our office is a little chaotic right now because we're moving, so peace and quiet is happening at my house instead.
I love your background. The little squiggle on the wall there is so cute.
Thank
and
you.
It just seems like so fun and like a vibe.
It is a vibe. I'm all about a physical space. I went to architecture school, so I'm like still very obsessed with creating spaces and like a whole personality to spaces.
I love that, and I bet that comes into play a lot with your newest endeavor that we will definitely get to. I am in my boyfriend's parents' messy guest room, but one day I'll have a space. I just keep putting that out there. I'll have the perfect podcasting and just office space.
Yeah.
So you just mentioned you went to architecture, and was it architecture and engineering school or just architecture and design?
Architecture and design, I ended up pivoting and going. I started at a fine arts school, and then I pivoted to architecture and design.
So that's very interesting that you started there, and then you've ended up making clothing geared towards the outdoor industry. Where, first of all, did it all start from the beginning with your love for the outdoors? Did you grow up in Montana?
I did not. I grew up in New England. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I spent a lot of my childhood in New Hampshire. I spent my summers up there, and being outside was a huge piece of my childhood. I was homeschooled when I was young, so I had a lot of time to spend outside, skiing, biking, hiking, building forts, all kinds of things outside with my brother. So that was very much so like a piece of who I was. And growing up doing those things is a reason why I moved out west when I was in college, and I stayed out here. So yeah, that's kind of where my interest in being outside came from. But my interest in clothing has been something that I've also had from a very young age. I've always loved style and used style as a tool of self-expression. I think that style is like a universal language that everybody speaks, and I really enjoy putting outfits together that like share my personality with the world non-verbally, which is kind of fun.
That's awesome, and a really cool point that I think some of us think about, but not a lot, as far as like clothing expression, because not all of us express ourselves through clothing. But I just remember being in middle school, and we had uniforms, and pretty strict uniforms, and it was public school, because where Amber and I grew up, it wasn't the best areas, but the whole city had uniforms. It was just polo shirts and like navy blue pants. We got khakis. I think my 8th grade year, we were able to wear khakis. That was huge. But most of the schools were pretty strict with only a couple colors of polos and pants. And I do remember, even at that time, there being a huge kind of argument of how it does limit your self-expression, but that was the point of why they had them, was because they didn't want kids wearing inappropriate things to school, like shirts that had, I don't know, cuss words or just weird shit on them. And I don't know, and it was so interesting of like, wow, like,
Yeah.
even then, like, I wasn't even realizing that those things could have an influence on me. If I saw like some weird shirt or something, I like to think it probably wouldn't have, but I mean, young minds are very moldable.
They are. Yeah, that's such an interesting perspective too. Once I was done with homeschooling, I went to public school, like we had no dress code. Like there wasn't even like any sort of, you could wear whatever the hell you wanted to wear, which was really fun. And of course, like a whole, middle school girls, like everyone was shopping at the same stores. They were wearing the
Mm-hmm.
same jeans, the same hoodies, like carrying the same bags, getting the same earrings. And that just like was so eye rolly to me. Like, why do you want to look like everybody else? Like, be you. You're 1 in 7 billion. Like, be that and own that. So that's definitely like as I grew up, I started just like wearing really wacky things. And in my high school, I was like totally known as the girl who would just like wear silly weird things and pull it off. And then I just kind of turned that into a career.
I love that. I wish I had any kind of fashion sense, or I don't know. I didn't fit the mold exactly of when we were in high school. Amber and I, Abercrombie and Fitch and American Eagle, that was all the rage. Because in high school, we could wear whatever we wanted. It was in middle school where we had uniforms. So it was just like very strict there. As soon as you were in ninth grade, it was a free for all in any school, obviously, except for like the finger rule for your skirt or shorts. Like, they couldn't be too short. But, I didn't actually fit into a lot of those clothes. Like Abercrombie and Fitch, I don't think I owned anything from them. I did shop at American Eagle here and there, like tried to, but yeah, so I don't know. I like tried to find things that were kind of in the trend or whatnot, but it still wasn't exactly on trend. But I wasn't, I don't know, creative enough, I guess, or maybe I just didn't want to stand out much clothing wise. I still think I have a hard
Mm-hmm.
time having a fashion sense of any sort.
Yeah, it's really interesting, just like the power that clothes have. They are like a tool to sort of blend in and chameleonize yourself if you're feeling it, but then they're also like a tool to really like stand out. But then also, if something doesn't fit properly, or something does fit properly, like clothing has the power to make us feel absolutely incredible. But
Mm-hmm.
if it doesn't fit properly, it has the power to like make us feel like absolute shit about ourselves and our bodies. So I think clothes are really powerful in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe touching on that point, maybe for me, why I haven't really, I guess, connected with clothing too much is because I've always had such a hard time finding things that fit well, because I've got big shoulders, big boobs, like muscular legs, love handles though, so I don't have like this like certain waist. So the fit of clothes is just so hard that it's rare that I find something, I put something on, I'm like, oh my God, this is it. When that happens, it does feel so, so amazing. But more often I just get so frustrated by them. That's why I don't have a great relationship with them, because I'm just like, I don't want
Yeah,
to go shopping. It's so fucking hard to find something that I get that feeling from.
totally. Yeah. And like everybody's had that fitting room experience where you are super excited about something on the rack and you bring it in and then you're just like, okay, I'm leaving the store. I'm going home and I'm done with this experience.
Yep, and I will eat that pint of ice cream because why not?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, clothes may shitty like that, especially if you're trying to fit into a trend, but that trend doesn't fit your body. And then it's like, okay, not
Mm-hmm.
only do these clothes not fit me, they make me feel shitty, but I'm also like now not part of this group or this trend that I wanted to be part of because the clothes are like excluding me from it. It's a whole thing. It's like the psychology of clothing is kind of an unlooked at thing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating to me.
Absolutely.
100%.
I am ready, like personally, for crop tops to never ever show their face again. It's been years and they're still around, and I'm like, I thought this was gonna be like a real quick like hitter and out, but nope, we've kept them and just gotten wide legs and more pant options to go with them. I'm like, God damn it.
You know, it's funny. One of our best selling pieces is a crop top. And we make a lot of crop tops now. We make a ton of different styles. And at first, it's interesting because when we first launched it, it was like not a strong seller. It's kind of a sports bra type crop top. It's just like a long line sports bra.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like trying to sell to millennial women who were like, fuck this. I don't want a crop top. I never want to see this thing again. Like, I am not 12. I don't want to wear these anymore. And then once we kind of like worked a little bit on the marketing and started to convince people like, hey, you don't have to wear a crop top with pants. Like, wear a crop top as a bra. Like, I'm wearing a crop top right now underneath a hoodie. Like, doesn't have to be your only layer. Once that sort of clicked with people, like we just like exploded with this one style. Now we make like 4 different crop top styles, and crop tops are it's like our number 2 bestseller.
I love it. Well, I'm a big overall wearer, and so I'm like, okay, well, for like crop tops, fitted crop tops would be good for that for sure. But I've never fit that trend, even in high school or middle school or anything. It was never for me, so I'm just an anomaly, anyways. That again, just because my body type, I've got, like I said, love handles, and those suckers have always been around big. Like, I've never wanted that showing. Like, high-waisted pants are not. It's just not something that made me feel comfortable. But like I said, there are ways to style them that it's not like solo. And like, okay, there is a purpose for this because I'm tucking it into something or wearing it under a hoodie so I have a light layer or whatnot.
Exactly.
But what I'm super curious about is how we went from architecture and design to clothing, because I know obviously, like you said, this has been a passion of yours since you were young. But what happened that made you say, I am actually going to start a business out of this?
Well, it was pretty accidental, to be honest, which is kind of funny now, like 12 years later. I made a lot of my own clothes growing up so that I could have things that other people didn't have. I wanted like those really interesting things that you couldn't go to the store and buy. And then in college, I made a lot more clothes, and I was always getting encouraged by my friends, like, oh, you should start an Etsy shop and sell these. Like, they're really cool. You should do that. But I left art school after a year because I was kind of like, what am I going to do with this printmaking degree? I need to do something where I'm like going to have creativity, but make some more money. So I went to architecture school, immediately was like, I don't think this is really what I want to do. I thought I was going to be like designing all these incredible things like Frank Gehry and all these really sculptural pieces. And then I quickly was like, oh no, I'm going to be doing like basement remodels and adding a bathroom to a bedroom here and there. So after college, I had a really not very creative job because architecture, like when you're first starting out, is just not creative. And as a way to like keep that creativity alive in my life, I started an Etsy shop for a reason to create. And I started sewing clothes in my parents' basement. Like the day I graduated from college, I bought a $100 sewing machine on eBay. And I would go to the thrift stores and find really fun, colorful clothes and cut them up and use them as fabrics and sew things and sell them on Etsy. And so that was just like my evening pastime to sort of just like have something fun and interesting to do that wasn't a computer-based project. And it like pretty quickly turned into something more than that. And I moved out west a year later in 2013. I guess I'd been there a couple of years before for a little bit of college, but I moved out fully in 2013. And when I moved out here, I really, like, the local community was super supportive of what I was doing. I was going to farmers markets and events, and I was like, whoa, I could make this a full-time job. So I did quit my job and started doing it full time. After a few years, I like couldn't keep up sewing and going to thrift stores anymore. It was just not really feasible. So I scaled a little bit and started working with some manufacturers in the US and started hiring a team and started developing our own fabrics. And yeah, I mean, a ton has happened in the last decade, but that's sort of how I went from architecture to clothing.
I
love that story.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just going for it, doing the thing. And the thing that you're passionate about, I think a lot of people, I know I struggle with this. It's like, I'm so passionate about a lot of things, but sometimes I'm like, God, I wish there was the one thing that I could just dive all into and make it like the thing. So I really love that when people can find that and just like I said, put everything into it, and it's that grit and tenacity that gets you to where you are now of like, I'm not gonna stop and give up. And so you're selling on Etsy, and how are people finding you on Etsy? Just word of mouth and then like searching, a hoodie dress or something on Etsy and discovering you that way? Or were
Yeah,
you doing like marketing or shows, or how are you getting yourself out there?
I was doing a couple things. Well, on Etsy back then, it was all about keywords.
Mm.
Etsy was really different then. I haven't sold on Etsy in probably, I don't know, 9 or 10 years or so. But it was all about keywords. So I would just like keyword the crap out of my titles. And then it's a huge marketplace of customers. So they would inevitably like search some of my keywords looking for something, and one of my listings would come up. So that's how people would find me on Etsy. And then I like totally just went to every selling opportunity I possibly could. I think my first year doing this business full time, I went to like 30 something events all over the country. Like I would load up my truck, I would drive to Southern California and Chicago, and I was in Washington, I was in Massachusetts, I was like in Vegas. I went everywhere and set up little booths at these like fine art shows or yoga festivals or music festivals, little craft shows, anything I could possibly sell at, I would. And like a lot of times they sucked, but a lot of times they didn't suck. And I'd bring my sewing machine on the road with me and plug into a power box at the campsite or something. I'd sleep in my truck. And I just was kind of on the road that whole first year, gathering a customer base that was my own outside of Etsy, because I knew I wanted to leave Etsy and sell on my own site. So that was sort of like how I kind of navigated moving out of like handmade craft world and into the next phase.
When how did you get into like finding your first store that someone wanted to sell your stuff? Or actually before that, obviously you're selling like or hand sewing everything. So at what
Yeah.
point did you get too many orders that you're like, I need help here, I need to start looking at manufacturing and outsourcing something?
Pretty quickly, honestly, I probably sewed like way beyond when I should have. I think the last year that I sewed, I was doing like a few $100,000 in revenue. And so I was literally sewing like every single one of those pieces of clothing. I was working nonstop. I was like having people in other cities go to thrift stores for me to find fabric and then send it to me. It was kind of nuts. And I also was the marketing component of it got really tricky because everything was one of a kind for
uh,
the most part, or like very small batch. Like I was kind of dabbling in custom fabrics, but I wasn't really able to make more than like 5 or 10 of something. So I would then have to photograph constantly and like list things online constantly. And that was taking up a huge amount of my time. My mornings would be like heading out with my tripod and my remote and taking photos. And then I would like go to the thrift stores the minute they opened. And then thrifting was starting to get really popular. So I was like competing with all of these resellers. And the city I lived in was really small. So we didn't have a ton of thrift stores. So yeah, it was just kind of like not feasible. I was not able to like meet the demand of what I could possibly sell. I was selling out at events and being like, I need more inventory. So at one event that I was at in Vegas, it was a yoga festival. My neighbor at the event, it was kind of a slow event. So we got to know our neighbors really well. And my neighbor booth was this couple, and they were in Arizona, and they like had their own factory and their own supply chain, and they printed everything on demand and had their sewers sew it, and then they would sell it at events. And they were like, if you want to start outsourcing, like we could help you. We have the infrastructure. We can do very small batches for you. We can supply your fabric. You can design your prints. We can print it. We can cut it. We can sew it. And they were amazing. Like they are really lovely people. And I worked with them for several years, and they allowed me to scale to a point where we kind of outgrew the relationship and moved on. But that just like being at that event put me in front of like the right people at the right time. And that was great.
Very
Serendipitous.
serendipitous.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So
Yep.
when you're
But
going
Brett and
also that's
from,
Rachel,
part
they're
of
great people.
you. That's also part of you putting yourself out there like that. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that takes a lot of effort.
Yeah. It was just like constant physical networking, which I was like 25 at the time. It was like fun and exciting and I liked going to do it. But
and
now I look back on it and I'm like exhausted just thinking of it.
what
Yeah.
year was it?
That was 2015.
Okay. Just getting an
Yeah.
idea of kind of like what the landscape, was in the
Yeah.
outdoor retail industry or whatnot at that point. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah. And at
when
that
you
point, I
found,
wasn't really in outdoor either. I was doing like fine art shows. So I was kind of like, I was still kind of like finding my niche.
yeah, and well, that brings me to wondering how you went from making these one of a kind products and maybe super, super small batch things to now you do have someone who can help you like produce more things. Is that when you had to decide, like, I'm gonna make a few kind of namesake items, or were you still kind of all over the board with what you were offering and designing?
Yeah, I definitely had to like hone in on a collection at that point, and I had to really quickly educate myself on uh, product life cycles and retail calendars because I wasn't just like making what I wanted to make. I had to digitize all my patterns. Like I didn't go to pattern drafting school. I was just kind of making stuff up. So I had to digitize all my patterns. And then I kind of had to be like, okay, I've got a plan now. We're going to launch skirts every year in March. We're going to make this many of them. We're going to launch dresses every year in September. We have to order the fabric at this time in order for it to arrive on time and in order for the factory to make it on time. So that was like a crash course in like logistics and supply chain and product planning that I just like had no idea about. I mean, I've learned everything on the job with this whole experience.
A lot of the people we talk to are in like go through that or have done it that way, and that's how I learn best too, is just like getting thrown in it and through the hands-on experience, because also a lot of times, I mean, you can learn so much being in different positions, but it's still, you're learning something brand new being the designer or the founder or something. There's, you can learn so much and then you're in a new role, so you're still going to learn on the job anyways. You can't know everything before you get in it because there's always going to be situations that happen that you could have never been prepared for anyways. So there's always that aspect of it. So I think that if you're just used to that, it comes a little bit easier. You're not just thrown off when something happens and you're like, oh my God, I did not study this or read about this in the book. How do I deal with it? You're like, this is just how it goes. We're always flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah, totally. I think the other thing that really was shocking for me to learn was I had sold to a couple stores leading up to then, but they were like, handmade stores, gift stores, not really like outdoor clothing stores with a fashion calendar. And then when I started selling to outdoor retailers, they were like, oh, yeah, we are buying for spring in spring of the previous year. So all of a sudden I had to think like, oh, 10, 12 months in advance. Like I need to plan what I'm doing next year to be able to like make it right now, photograph it right now, get a calendar together for you, give it to you so you can order it, and then like go and make it over the next 10 months. So that was like definitely, that was like totally unknown to me. And then in a few years later, I ended up being a winner at Title IX's Pitch Fest. And so I got a purchase order from Title IX. And that was like, okay, I need to like figure out how to make this now and like really get on top of my calendar and planning. And so I hired a production manager and started to grow a team. And then we've like taken a lot of pivots since then.
Was that kind of what put you on, started like a new roadmap for you of where you were headed with was the Title IX purchase order and the Pitch Fest?
I was kind of on that trajectory before. The brand wasn't called Ewer then, it was called Kind Apparel. I rebranded to Ewer in 2020, but around like 2016-ish, I really kind of pivoted away from these like sort of non-technical clothes and really fully into like fun, cute, technical outdoor wear. Because I live in a mountain town and it was just kind of a need of my community. Like you put on a cute skirt in the morning that you can wear to work, but then also at a trail run at lunch and just like keep it on to like splash in the river with your kids at the end of the day. Just like clothes that didn't look like you just walked out of REI and got like the outdoor starter kit. I really just like hated that look. And I think back,
Uh-huh.
like now there's so much cute, awesome, well designed, thoughtfully curated stuff for women. But
Hmm.
back then, it sounds funny to say because it wasn't that long ago, but it just wasn't a thing. Like there wasn't cute stuff for women in the outdoor industry that was made by women. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this and like make fun, cute stuff. So then that's kind of how I got on the Title IX trajectory. And I was like, I'm going to pitch to Title IX. Here's this opportunity to pitch to Title IX. Let's keep growing this. Yeah.
Where was your first kind of factory or production run after you left the folks you met at the yoga festival?
Oh, where was the first one? Since leaving them, I've probably worked with like 15 to 20 different factories.
Wow.
Wow.
I think we went from them to LA or Chicago. It's always been in the US,
Okay,
but
that's what I was wondering, if you always stayed in the US or
yes,
if you did go overseas, had an experience there, and that's what inspired you to just stay closer to home and have a little more I don't know. Obviously even on US soil things can be a shit show and you don't have control when you're turning something over to a factory to run production lines. But it feels probably a little bit easier to go see what's going on in said factory. And there's a little more
yes,
rules behind what they are doing and how they produce things than overseas. So that's awesome that you've
yes.
always been in the US. Was that something that was important for you from the get go? Or did it just
It
happen that
wasn't, it
way?
is really is now, but it wasn't really how I started that. It was out of convenience and ease because I met a great supplier that was based in the US. And then I realized through like getting acquainted with friends who were running production overseas and kind of the complicated nature of that and the turnaround times and the minimums. And because I was small, it just seemed like working in the US was the best option for me. Like, very easy to communicate. I didn't have to hire an agent to work in the same language and same time zone. I didn't have to hit like thousands of piece minimums on styles. So I could make
Mm-hmm.
like 10 different styles and 100 of each style instead of just 1,000 of one style. So that offered me a lot of flexibility. And then, yeah, everything's just a quick plane ride away if things go wrong. And I've had to do that a lot. Just like, hey, tomorrow we're going here, we're getting our stuff out of here, and we're fixing this problem. And that doesn't necessarily, that's just not as easy overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I think apparel manufacturing in general is not, the industry in the US has really suffered in the last 30 years. It's not very robust and it's much more difficult to make stuff here. And Asian manufacturing is so much more adept at manufacturing than we are, especially apparel and technical apparel, and they have the infrastructure that we do not. So that's been a little bit of an uphill battle, but I'm just like kind of a martyr for US made at this point.
Yeah,
Here
I
for
think this is
that.
a really great conversation piece too, because I think a lot of people might not understand why it's important, because I feel like especially in the last few years, but I think even before that, there was kind of a stereotype of the people who believe in the importance of made in the USA were thrown into a box of certain beliefs coming from a certain area or thing, like, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that
There's like the
it
whole
goes way
America
beyond that.
mentality.
Yeah, exactly. That is like,
Totally.
because my dad was very
Great way
much
of
of
putting
like,
it.
yeah, yes, America. Um,
Yeah.
my dad is very much a made in the U.S. guy. He's a union guy, but I don't, not to bring politics into it. Like, he's a Democrat though, but he hunts and does this and that. Like, a lot of his beliefs, or outward beliefs rather, people would maybe put him in being on the right side of things, but he's very much not. And so I always grew up with this mentality that, like, hey, you can look a certain way, talk a certain way, want certain things, but that doesn't mean that that's what you like. All of your beliefs are this or that.
Ultimately
So
are.
with the Made in America thing, I know that it's important to many people for many reasons that go beyond just being like, oh, America only kind of thing. It provides jobs. It provides just so much more economic boost in places. And there are we have stricter rules, like I mentioned, as far as production and manufacturing and things, and labor laws. So that's the things that were important to my dad.
Yes.
Totally.
And environmental laws too. Factories can't just discharge or do whatever willy-nilly. Environmental things.
There is a lot. I mean,
go ahead.
Oh, no. Keep going.
Oh, I understand the ease and for bigger companies who are looking for those large, like, MOQs, the minimum order quantities. They need thousands of things. It's super easy. Like, hey, go over here and do this. And it's less costly. But for the smaller brands, that's the thing, like, they can more easily afford it being here. Like, the labor's not as much because they're not making as much, but you get into this place, it seems like, with companies, that you're in the growing phase and you are going to outgrow the places that are available here in the US. Because like you mentioned, in the last 30 years, it's really suffered here because it just doesn't exist at the scale that it used to in making apparel here in the first place.
It's so true. Yeah. And there is so much to unpack there. And I think we toe this interesting line politically because our customer base, if you look at our clothes, you can get a pretty good understanding of the political leanings of who most of our customers are. But because we are made in America, that also aligns us with a different population of people. So we are like very mixed in who our community is, which is really interesting. And it's also, like, education has become a huge piece of our brand, and it's like our main content strategy because it's so deep that in order to like fully understand like the differences between made in Asia and made in America, there's so much that has to be unpacked and understood. And like most of our fabric manufacturing happens in Asia. The US just does not have technical fabric manufacturing here. We don't have the infrastructure. We never really have because in the early 90s, we offshored most of our production through NAFTA, and Asia was the area that got all of that infrastructure to create all those textiles. So the textile industry here is like totally lacking. And we actually it's less advantageous to us to make stuff here when our fabric is made in Asia. Our biggest volume fabric, which is this fleece that I'm wearing, is only available in China. It used to be made in the US, but Polartec offshored the production of this, and it's now in China. And to get it into the US, we pay a 47% tax on it just to import it.
Oh my God.
And so it's like it's crazy. And so that's why a lot of manufacturing is still happening in Asia, because the tariffs continue to rise. The Trump administration added a 17% additional tariff onto everything that comes into this country. So it would be way cheaper for us to make it in China simply because we'd save like 50% of our tax on this fabric. But there is just really an element to understanding value. I think when you pay more for something, there is an inherent value that's associated with it. Like, you expect something different out of it. If you buy a $5 t-shirt, there's very few expectations. You know, I can wear it one time or 0 times, and I'm only out $5. I don't really care about it. I don't have financial attachment to it. It's just whatever. But if I've paid $62 for a t-shirt, which is what ours cost, there's like an expectation that it's going to be made really well, that it's not going to fall apart, that you're going to be able to wear it repeatedly, and that it's going to hold its value. So we actually have a resale site on our site. We have our own branded resale site. So people can buy our stuff, wear it for as long as they want, and then resell it to peers. So we look at clothes as an asset and something that you should really, truly take care of and value and not discard and throw away. Fashion produces so much waste, but all of that, it really is like a cost. Cost is like that trigger in people's minds to care more. And it's also a trigger to say like, oh, why is this so expensive? That's crazy. But we now own our own manufacturing, and we've brought it back in house. We work with one external factory in California, but for us, the story's easy because it's like, here are the women who work in our factory. Here are the people who the sale of these clothes is paying. Like, we can't pay them $12 an hour. Our average sewing cost is $20 an hour. That's our average wage in our factory. And like, American labor is really expensive because Americans have a certain expectation of a quality of life. And I think that as consumers, we should care about that quality of life in the person who's creating the things that we are consuming.
Yes. That is
well said. And
exactly
also true.
Yeah, and it's not only that we have a standard, like a different standard of a quality of life, the cost of living, like you're selling online, so you're selling nationally. I'm in California, Amber's in Washington, you're in Montana. Even just between those three states, cost of living differs exponentially. I'd say, I'm not sure about Montana. I've actually never been there, but hopefully I'm going in October. But
Yay.
For what I know in Washington, I go there pretty often. Cost isn't too different between California and Washington, at least where I am and where I go, but the taxes. I think everyone in our country knows how fucked California taxes are. So that is insane. And that's you can't, paying someone $12 an hour, I mean, even minimum wage, you're like, people who make minimum wage should be teenagers who are still living under their parents' home or, have not completely supporting themselves. It's absolutely crazy. And Heather Kelly and I touched on this, which y'all may have heard that episode already if you're listening to this now, but just kind of talking about, she has a very small in-house staff, and as do you, and all these things need to be, getting that messaging out is important. And that's what I want to do by having you guys, you ladies on the podcast, is sharing with our audience. Again, when you're going into a store and you're thinking about, wow, this is expensive, I could buy this cheaper thing. Thinking about behind the scenes, all the other things you are supporting. One, the quality anyways is so much better. But not only is it that, you are supporting a small business who is supporting many other people under it, who it has a direct effect to. It, like, the smallest changes in your business can change these people's lives. So whether good or bad, if you have to let someone off or lay someone off, it's one person out of a 12-person team, not one person out of a 200-person team, which obviously their life is still affected in that huge, if they're part of a huge team, but the company isn't really thinking about that. You are like actually connected to the people that you're working with so much more deeply. And I think that in itself too is just so much better. Like, we can go obviously on and on about the corporation type thing, but again, supporting small businesses, you are directly affecting so many more people, and in a good way when you're actually supporting them.
Yeah.
You really
Especially
are.
women-owned businesses.
Yes.
Yeah. And like, if a product changes, like, if our t-shirts go from $62 to $66, well, that's because maybe we like offered health insurance to our employees or something, or like we bought our own building. Like, all those little factors are inherent in cost. And yeah, there are some interesting stats that I think about a lot in relation to consumption, because I think it's all about just like, buy less. Like, we want you to buy our clothes, you need clothes, but like, we don't make a shit ton of styles. We make like 25 styles a year. And a place like Shein, like fast fashion, they're releasing like 3,500 new styles a day. Like, that is insane.
Wow.
And in the 1960s, the average American bought like 25 pieces of clothing, and they spent their, like, the modern equivalent of $4,000 on it. So, and that includes like shoes. Everything was regionally made and like made with kind of, like a lot of local supplies too. And now if you fast forward to the 2020s, we are consuming, the average American, 75 pieces of clothing a year, and we're spending like $1,000 on them. So that just tells, like, who needs 75 pieces of clothing a year? And then of those 75 pieces of clothing, the average piece of clothing is only worn 7 times before it's thrown away. Not even like resold, given away, it's thrown away. So sustainable fashion experts
Quality.
advise that you should like make a decision about buying something expecting to wear it 35 times or more. So we talk a lot about cost per wear. So yeah, like this dress might be $150, but if you buy a dress for $30 and it breaks on, like the strap breaks on the first wear, then that just cost you $30 and it went in the trash. But if you wear this $150 dress like 35 times, then your cost per wear is like very insignificant. And then when you're done with it, you can resell it because it's probably still in really good shape. And
Do
so,
you have
yeah,
that?
just like conscious consumption.
Do you have that on your website, like in the price, like they do in the grocery store, where it says like cost per item, or if you buy more, cost per wear, like the CPW is like per
That's a
30
really good
wears or
idea. We
something?
don't.
That would be awesome. That'd be a
We don't
fun
have
thing. So
that,
you
but
could
that
just
would
kind of,
be really fun.
yeah, I think that would be
Yeah.
a way of just putting that into someone's mind, especially a first time customer who comes to your website and they see this catches their eyes, and that puts it more into perspective. Like, oh, wait, you're right. Like, that makes it, especially a woman's brain, we do think that way. So how many
Yeah.
times can I wear this? I think about that when I buy my gym pass, right? Okay, how many, or season pass, right? How many times do I have to go skiing to make this pass, quote unquote, worth it? Everything after that is basically free.
Yep.
Totally. Yeah. People like throw a lot of shade at girl math, but it's actually very legit.
It's effective. It's
It's
effective.
extremely legit.
Yes,
Yes.
we're very intelligent mathematicians.
Totally. I also love the resale factor. I've been seeing a lot of brands doing that, offering stores and buyback programs and reselling. I think that's a great way, too, to get new customers in the door when they're apprehensive to spend that $150 on the first thing. And then they go see it. They say, oh, this dress is used. It's $50. I'm going to buy it. And then they end up wearing that dress 30 times. They're way more likely to come back when they do need that replacement or want a different color or something to spend the full dollar amount on it. Because my other question was, I don't know if it's really a question, but when you talked about just pricing, right, buying a $66 t-shirt versus a $5 t-shirt, I think in our society, given where we're at, especially right now with the economy overall, and spending our money, it's a risk to buy that $66 shirt for the first time when you don't know if it's going to last longer than the $5 t-shirt, because I hear that argument all the time of a like off-brand thing versus on-brand. Like, well, it works just as good, so why would I spend my money over there? Obviously, when you get into the actual conversation of like, well, the material, where was it made, sourced, all those things, this was better for the environment or better for the economy. But the consumer is most likely just thinking about themselves and their use for it and not seeing past that. So how do we break that barrier?
Right.
It's a really tough conversation, and I think that there's no simple answer, simple solution, because unfortunately, I think it comes back to like our wage structure in this country, because buying a $66 t-shirt is not accessible for everybody. And there are many people in this country who can only buy that $5 t-shirt. And so we get stuck in this cycle of like Americans are not getting paid enough to live. And so they're not getting paid enough to consume like properly or whatever you want to call it. And so then they have to keep feeding this cycle of like exploitation. But that's just like a reality now. And I don't really know a solution to it. I think, as we've all experienced inflation and the cost of living just rising dramatically over the last few years, the conversation comes into play a lot. But cost per wear is definitely like something that is motivating for people. If you can like save up enough to be able to purchase that one $66 t-shirt for the whole summer instead of like 10 $5 t-shirts, that's like certainly a step. But it's really like it's personal. It's based on ethics. It's based on beliefs. It's based on personal financial circumstances. And yeah, it doesn't work for everybody, but it's definitely something that we really like talking about and encouraging people to participate in.
For surely a good conversation to keep on happening.
Yeah. And
yeah,
I mean, just like things like this, getting out there, spreading the word as much as we can, but we do get stuck in our bubbles, right? Like a lot of our audience is going to be a certain audience. We have a target audience. And so how do we get past that? How are these voices heard outside of the bubble? But
Yeah.
it can be a game of telephone. Obviously, you tell your friend who isn't like super into this industry or the trends or whatever, and it just kind of can trickle down. You can have the trickle down effect, but we know that trickle down effect obviously takes a lot longer for sure. But I want to know more about the fact that you said you now have your, like, you own your manufacturing.
Yeah, most of it.
And so that,
We
does that mean
had,
you own a factory?
yeah, we started a factory in early 2023. And
Wow.
that was on the heels of really getting pretty fucked by the American apparel manufacturing industry over the last few years prior. There's, as we've addressed, not a ton of great infrastructure. There's really a huge lack of accountability in the industry. And as a small brand, like, you're never going to be a big player or have big financial sway in many of these relationships. So that results in a lot of mistakes being made by the factory, and you as the brand just literally have no recourse unless you hire an attorney. And unfortunately, my past experience has led me to realize that if the mistake is less than $50,000, there's absolutely no point in hiring an attorney. So,
right.
Like, losses that I've experienced over with my brand over the last decade is like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of messed up production that was not my fault. But the factory just is like, okay, fuck you, like, deal with it. I have engaged attorneys. I've been involved in lawsuits, and it just got to be so repetitive that the last time this wasn't the last time, but like a big time that it happened in 2020, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to survive if I'm putting the most important thing in somebody else's hands who doesn't care. We bounced around from a lot of different factories in 2020. And we ended up going for most of the year without any inventory to sell because of all these production mistakes. I closed our office. I moved back here into my basement. I didn't have a team. I had one other person on my team. We really whittled down the team a lot, and just kind of like waited until something worked with a supplier and we finally got production. But during those like 8 months or so without product, I started telling all these stories about USA made and supply chains on Instagram, because nobody really knew what a supply chain was until 2020. And then we all became very acutely aware of them because we were all impacted by them. So I just started talking about it and educating people, and that became a huge piece of my brand. I rebranded as Ewer, and when we finally got product, we sold out like instantaneously. And I was like, okay, I'm going to actively work towards building my own production, because I don't see this problem ever going away until I'm like a gigantic player in the industry, and that just might not be my reality ever. So in 2021, I ran a crowdfunding campaign that I like coded into our site because I didn't want to give any percentage to Kickstarter. And we raised $100,000 in 30 days to, at the time I was looking at a building to buy. It was like totally like random, spur of the moment, spontaneous thing. And I'd found this building, and I needed like an extra 100K for the down payment. So I raised the money, went to buy the building. The whole sale became super complicated and it ended up falling through. But I kind of allocated those funds, set them aside. We rented a space. We started to build out our team. I had some leftover industrial equipment from when I was sewing, but we built out more of a fleet of industrial machines, and we started sewing a small amount in like January of 2023. And today we are a team of 7, and we make about 65% of our product in Missoula in our own space, well, in our rented space. And on Tuesday, we start moving into our very own building that we bought in June with these funds from 2021. It was all community funded. And we've been renovating it all summer. And like, actually, like, our production team has like painted murals and refinished the concrete floors, and we move in there next week. And that's like going to be the full culmination of this. We now have a really great factory partner who handles more of our high volume stuff, because we have struggled with staffing a lot. It's been our really big challenge over the last 2 years. But we really are like, we're doing it, and we're kind of taking some baby steps. I don't know if or when we will make 100% of stuff in house, but when we first started last year, we were doing about 30%, and now we're at 65, and our team is getting more and more skilled. And we have all the equipment that we need to make everything in-house. And we have all the training on all this equipment that we need to make everything in-house. So yeah, it's kind of, it's fun, and it feels like a little bit of a step back sometimes because we're bringing it in-house, but we had to take a step back to take massive steps forward. And having control over it has just been like a game changer in our quality and our customer satisfaction.
Wow. That
what
is amazing.
Success story.
Thank you. It's been such a journey.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to see this factory. Because so if you're listening, which you obviously are, people out there in the world, it is, the time we're recording this is August 30th. So when Mallory says Tuesday, it'll be Tuesday, September 3rd, that she's moving in. And I have your Instagram open because I read this post about your kind of, what you wrote about, like, seeing this vision of this factory and now seeing it come to fruition. And your grand opening party will actually be just 2 days after this episode is live. This episode, you are listening on September 13th in the grand, or September, whatever that Thursday is, 12th, I guess. The 12th. And the grand opening party is Saturday, September 14th. So if you're in Missoula, that's where it's at, right? It's going to be in Missoula, or it
that is. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then you gotta go. Well, actually,
you gotta go.
Oh yeah, to the grand opening party. Yes, go to the grand opening party.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. We're going to have, it's like a very non-traditional factory too. We did this writing exercise with Anastasia of Kula Cloth, who I know you've had on your podcast. She's a really good friend of mine. And this was 3 years ago. We went out in a lake by her house on her canoe, and we just like wrote down what we wanted our spaces to look like when we had our dream spaces for our businesses. And I wrote down Quonset hut, which I've always been obsessed with Quonset huts. And if you don't know what they are, they're like these sort of round, half pipe shaped kind of buildings. They're like an old wartime barrack structure. And they're like, kind of lose a bunch of space in the upstairs, but they're really funky looking. And they're like these steel buildings. And I wrote down 3 years ago that I wanted it to be called the universe and kind of like space themed and like very vibrant. And as you walked through the space, you'd be walking through different experiences, and it would be in a Quonset hut. And then, like, lo and behold, the building that worked out after the 12 that didn't was a Quonset hut. And we have this incredible muralist painting this amazing mural. We have one of our sewers is a sculptor, and she has this incredible fabric sculpture of a whale, and it's going to feel like you're sort of underwater, and it's going to be really fun. And then we'll be unveiling that, launching some fun new stuff, having a great, awesome raffle, and inviting people to just come by and enjoy and have a beer. And it's not in an industrial park. It's in a residential neighborhood along the bike path, like a couple minutes from downtown. So we're like stoked about it. Yeah.
Wow, that gave me goosebumps, amazing. Literally.
Seriously, you're a witch.
Anastasia is the real witch. She like shared some of her witchy capacities with me.
I love it. Exactly. Heather did some witchery on me.
Yeah.
I love it. If you guys look at the Ewer Instagram, so Shop Ewer on Instagram, the photo, so now hearing, because I was like, what's a Quonset hut after I read it, and I didn't look it up, but I was like, I wonder if it is this image that is on Instagram. That will give you a great idea if you don't just straight Google the term. This just sounds so amazing. I love the play on the words with universe and Ewer. And I think that just really makes people feel like it's for them, right? Universe. So this is for you. You are creating for the people, and creating this connection. It's again just another way for people to really make that brand connection that I think is lacking in a lot of places. Obviously, that's the struggle between a big brand who can produce so much, but you just don't have that. You know, if you rip Patagonia, no shade to Patagonia, they still make quality things and more sustainably than others, obviously, but I don't know. I don't have as deep of a connection because it's such a big company. As if I ruin my Ewer dress, I'm like, oh my God, Samantha sewed this. like
totally. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like the Patagonia is obviously still a huge player in the industry, but I kind of like in our little circle, they're like almost becoming irrelevant. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're like, they did the grand, amazing thing that changed the industry, but now
Mhm.
it's just kind of like, yeah, they're doing their thing and they're not really like innovating that much. And they'll always be great, but like time for some new fun stuff.
Yeah, well, I think
Hmm.
that
I
that's
agree.
also because you're seeing people like you in smaller companies, and there is becoming more of an appreciation and voice behind the smaller brands that people are more likely to do that. And once Patagonia was smaller, right? They like I said, innovative, but they're not. The R1 fleece will always be around, and the R1's not changing much anymore. What? How can it? But go somewhere to like you were and you get that grid fleece but in a beautiful design and a different fit, like especially if we're talking about the fact that it's for women. And Patagonia still is, in my opinion, more on the shrink it and peak it side of things. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe they've got
They're,
some great women fit models, but from what I see, it's just the man's but smaller and like a little hip action.
yeah, like a little hip action.
Yeah, exactly. Like, where it flares on me
Yeah,
is at my belly button anyway, too. Like, that's not my hips.
totally. I think that's an interesting thing too. Like back in the day, handmade or small brand almost had like a negative connotation, like this assumption that like, oh, it was made by one person. Like they're it's not going to be very good. Like the quality is not going to be good. They don't really know what they're doing. They don't really have the resources. But now small brands are the most innovative because they have the ability to innovate and be
Hmm.
nimble. And like the coolest things are coming out of small brands. Like the most interesting fits. Like a couple brands that are doing like multiple body type fits. Like
Mm-hmm.
Jen Loofborough from Alpine Fit, they
Awesome.
have two different types of fit for every product that they make. They have a straight fit and a curvy fit. And like you see that even in big brands like outside of our industry, like Abercrombie now, as we were talking about that earlier in this conversation, but they've now resurfaced as a big player in the game. They're
Yes, they
obviously a
have.
big company, but they're like catering to women's bodies specifically with multiple different fits. And I think that's really interesting. And like all of my favorite things now are from small brands or small makers. And they are
Yep.
far better in quality and design and fit and uniqueness than like anything I can get at a big box store.
Absolutely.
Totally.
I am so bummed that I hope your party is amazing, great, and I know that it will be. But I am planning to be in Missoula exactly 1 month after the party. But I still would absolutely love to connect and check out the universe. That would really just
Yes.
make it. The Outdoor Media Summit is the 14th through the 16th, and I've got a big goal. I'm trying to raise money on our donation site, which is Buy Me a Coffee, to be able to fund the ticket and the travel and taking time off to get there. I went a couple years ago for a marketing job and I loved it and it was great. And I got to learn a little, do a couple podcasty things. But 2 years ago, we weren't growing as much. We were still kind of just mostly me and Amber. And in the last year and a half, really, it's just we've got some steam behind us with great guests and things. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I have to go again to this summit. And to be able to go strictly for the podcast is an amazing feeling to have. I want to go to Montana so bad, and finding out, like I said, that you were there in this factory, like, oh my fucking God, I just already can't wait. And I'm not letting any thought in my mind be there besides I am going.
You will be there. You're like by association, you're also a witch now. So you'll
Yes.
manifest it. You'll be there.
Oh, I'm so excited to be a witch.
We'll love to host you too. It'll be so fun. It's going to be a great time of year there. It'll be cool, fun fall. Yeah, you guys live in the mountains, you know. But yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be great. We'll give you a fun
Love it.
experience.
Awesome. I'm so
Yeah. Right
excited.
now it's kind of hard to see. Like right now it's just kind of a shit show disaster with like
I'm sure.
boxes everywhere. And we're like, we went there this morning and we're like, is this really going to turn into like what we think it's going to turn into in a week? Can we do this?
Yeah, right.
We'll see. Yeah.
Well, you got two, kind of. So
We have two kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
We want to be done by the 10th because
Okay.
we got picked up by our local Shields for last year. And so Shields will be carrying our line starting next month and they're sending their sales team over for training. And so when we were planning the move, we were like, oh, we have to be in the new space by the time Shields comes by, because we want them to like see what our idea and vision of the brand is. So yeah, we have, we're going to try to get it all done next week.
That's so cool and so
You got
huge.
this.
Congratulations on that Shields deal. That's awesome.
Thank you. It was such a funny way that it came about too. It was like really kind of accidental and weird. If you have a minute, it's a fun story.
Yes, go. Yeah, please.
Yes. We like used to sell to a local version of Shields that was across the street, and their ownership changed and their selection changed, and so they no longer carried our brand. So we decided, okay, well, we'll go sell to Shields. And I went on Instagram, and I figured we have this large community of people. Somebody on there's got to know somebody at Shields. And I posted what we wanted to do. And I was like, who has a contact for a women's buyer at Shields? And I got a lot of like great leads. But one really crazy thing happened. One of our customers was like at a local coffee shop when she was looking at her Instagram story. And like on the counter where she was sitting was just happened to be a business card for a Shields women's buyer. And the name on the card was Jordan. And so she took a picture and she sent the picture to me, and I called the phone number on it. And I was like, hey, Jordan, this is very weird, but my name's Mallory. And here's the funky story of how I got your phone number. And she was like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is really cool. Like, I think our buyer knows about you. You guys want to come in tomorrow and show us your line? So that was really funny. And then they've been so friendly and wonderful
witchy.
since. And witchy.
I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible, because my good friend who's a buyer definitely doesn't have a business card, and she would never leave it. And they absolutely hate cold calls. Like once in a blue moon, when something happens and comes by, and either she's maybe heard of the brand through someone, she's like, oh yeah, actually a friend told me about this, or she ran across it. But otherwise she's like, oh my God, I cannot, like right now too, especially like I can't bring another brand in, a new brand, a small brand. So the fact that this buyer's card was on a counter, that in itself is
I know, it's
amazing.
Crazy. Because I had even gone into the store and gone up to the customer service desk and asked who their buyers were. And they were like, oh, we don't know. We think the buying happens at like the like corporate headquarters. But yeah, serendipity.
Yeah. Anytime I've called a bigger store looking for the buyer, they're like, I have no idea. Let me transfer you to my manager. Like, it's so crazy how removed it is in the bigger stores, just within the staff. I was like, wow. Like, yeah, not everyone's best friends with their buyer like I was, but but I thought that you'd still know who the person was. But nope, not at those levels when there's 20 steps between sales associate and buyer.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Again, huge congratulations on the Shields deal, on the new factory. I cannot wait to see it. Before we get out of here, is there anything that you would like to leave the listeners with? It can be a piece of advice for their own business life, or just simply where to find Ewer.
Well, let's see. I'll start with this easy one, where to find Ewer. I love hanging out on Instagram. I am the personality behind our Instagram. So I'll probably message you if you DM, and our Instagram handle, which Taryn mentioned earlier in the conversation, is at @shopewer, like you're shopping. And Ewer is YOUER. And then our website is shopewer.com. I think if people are trying to start a business, advice is like, well, my general advice with everything is just like try to have fun with it. Try to find something that you really, really like and you know you're going to have fun doing. But with starting a business, my biggest learning has been that it's all consuming. It's like what you eat, sleep, and breathe, like you talked about earlier, like something that you're deeply passionate and fully committed to. And it doesn't have to be that way for everybody, for sure. But for me, it really totally is. And so I think if you're looking to start something, or you have this passion that you want to turn into a business, like just sit with it. Make sure it's something that you really see yourself like wanting to work 100 hours a week towards, because you are going to have to do that. That is going to be the reality. And if you're not super motivated by it, then it's maybe not going to fulfill all of your dreams. And it might not financially fulfill all of your goals. So you really have to like have a lot of heart and soul. So yeah, I guess that would be my advice.
It's great advice. They always say that entrepreneurship, you want to go for it to have this freedom and flexibility and whatever, but really it turns out that you're working 80 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week, and there's no time off, because if the fucking building's on fire or anything's on fire anywhere, you're going to hear about it. There's no like vacation and turning it off until you get to a certain point where you're just kind of sitting atop watching the others, which most of us aren't for a long while, if we even want to give those reins away.
That's true.
Mallory,
yeah,
thank you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying it is really magical. It's really hard, but also really magical.
Yeah. I love it. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, telling us about Hewer, and also the conversation of just kind of explaining the importance behind smaller brands and manufacturing local, or at least paying attention to those things. Where was this? It doesn't always have to be, of course, made in the US. Most things are not these days. But if you're at least kind of looking into those things before you try out a new brand or something, then that's simple too. Put it in your cart, take a minute, figure out if it's going to be worth it for you, for all, and all of that. And I can't wait to see you in October. Putting it out there.
It'll
Witchcraft.
be great. Yes. Go buy Taryn a coffee so she can come see.
Yeah, totally. $5, $1, anything matters. It
great.
adds up, my friends. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next week. Don't forget to follow Shop Hewer on Instagram. I love your Instagram, your stories. The peeing in a bodysuit thing was hilarious. Pretty simple to do when you actually think about it. So guys, go give her a follow, check out the website, and know that if you send a message, you will be hearing from Mallory directly. Thank you all, and bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode and would do us a huge favor, since we don't have any sponsors or anything like that, and would rate and review us on whatever platform it is you use, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, whatever it is. And if you're listening and downloading just through the website, tearingituppodcast.com, leave comments. We'll definitely engage back with you. And on social media right now, we're just on Instagram. Tearing It Up Podcast is the handle. Like the post, share the post, comment on the post, whatever it is you got. Show us your love so we just stay relevant and show up in the rankings at all. So again, rate and review, please. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.